Welcome back to this special edition covering extensively yesterday's attack in Istanbul's Ataturk airport. We're now going to be joined by a Hürriyet reporter, Barçın Yinanç from Istanbul. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
So is Turkey getting used to these kind of attacks?
Well, that's not the first time we're seeing attack of this dimension. In fact, we have seen an attack in Ankara, which has costed more casualties in terms of death of our citizens. For years, Turkey has been struggling against terrorist attacks. However, in the course of the past 1 year, the number of attacks with very high casualties have been very frequent. So this is a bit of a novelty, you know, in comparison to previous years' attacks where the casualties were rather more limited. Now we're seeing death in the dozens, and that, of course, never you can get used to terror attacks. Every time, obviously, you're shocked, even when there's one person killed or more injured. But the level of shock is getting higher because the frequency is getting higher of these large attacks.
Now, how's the Turkish public reacting to this growing sense of instability?
Well, unfortunately, these terror attacks, instead of uniting the population against the terrorists, it unfortunately polarizes and deepens and consolidates the polarization in the society. Those who are staunchly against the ruling AK Party, they blame the government, and those who are supporting the AK Party, they prefer to blame outside forces, and they even prefer to blame the opposition for not giving enough support to the government's efforts to fight terrorism. So unfortunately, in contrast to other countries, when such incidents unites people, in Turkey it increases polarization. Having said that, however, yesterday when news were out that there was a huge attack and there could be need for additional blood, people have rushed to the hospitals to donate their blood. So on the humanitarian level, everyone tries to do whatever they can. But when it comes to who, why did it happen, why wasn't it prevented, then people start having very much polarized views.
And do you expect the government to announce new measures in order to prevent these attacks?
Well, the government has taken draconian measures in order to fight terror. Unfortunately, some of these draconian measures are concentrating on expressing thought, and it's not where they should focus. On the other hand, they should have no alibi of saying that there are weaknesses in terms of the legal protection of the security forces, because just recently they have made recent amendments on providing additional legal shields for the military when they take action against terrorists. So at this stage, I don't know what is left. They have taken a lot of measures, and unfortunately sometimes I have the feeling they're using these terrorist attacks in order as a tool to oppress dissent, to minimize opposing voices.
And do you expect the government to take new steps against what is known as radical Islam?
Well, the Turkish government had already taken measures to minimize the threat of radicalists. What's the problem in Turkey is that it is faced by threats from several frontiers. It is not only fighting against the outlawed Kurdistan Workers' Party, but it is also facing the threat of the radical leftist organizations who are staging attacks, and it is also fighting against the radical Islamists. So for what I know, it's that the Turkish side, especially in the course of the last 1 or 2 years, have started to put more and more pressure on the radical Islamists. And in fact, the reason why we are seeing more attacks on the part of the radical Islamists is precisely because they feel more and more pressure from the Turkish side.
Berçan Yaninç, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And with me in studio is Ali Waqed, our senior Middle East analyst, and our diplomatic correspondent, Oz Rosenberg. Thank you for joining us. Ali, some very interesting points, and I'd like to talk about the last one with our phoner from Istanbul. Radical Islam has found it very cozy, you could say, to be in Turkey, which has offered a hub. Do you believe that the Turkish authorities will now take serious measures to fight all of the different radical groups that have had a lot of freedom of activity within its borders?
You know, a couple of hours after the declaration of Israeli Prime Minister and his Turkish colleague about the reconciliation process, the Kremlin published a statement saying that President Erdogan sent a letter of apology to the Russians for the incident of the Russian airjet in November, and this shows that the Turkish regime is in a way restudying its policy vis-a-vis the Middle East and questions in the Middle East. Erdogan is leading an Islamic party, but Turkey was never an Islamist state. It is true that the Turkish population was exposed to Islam in comparison to the corrupted era before Erdogan, but they were never a radical population like we knew in the region. And I think that the equation is very clear: whether to join the international effort to fight the Islamic State, or to keep flirting with it, as did Recep Tayyip Erdogan in the last years during the Syrian crisis. We know that the borders between Syria and Turkey was the easiest border to pass for the jihadists, also jihadists from the al-Nusra Front, the Al-Qaeda affiliated Syrian group, and of course the Islamic State. And in the last weeks, we can see that the Turkish government is kind of revising its position. Hopefully, we are going to see a shift that will help the Turkish to fight the terror.
Which brings up my next question, because on one hand, there is an expectation to boost security, to act, to clamp down on the different groups, but on the other hand, they're giving a lot of legal backing to individual military personnel, and this is always something dangerous.
Yes, and you mentioned in your introduction that Turkey is kind of became a hub for radical Islams, and I want to translate. When you say radical Islam, we are talking about two main organizations that receive the Turkish support. We are talking about the Al-Nusra Front that, according to some intelligence reports, are still being backed by the Turkish intelligence in its fights against the regime in the border region between Syria and Turkey, and of course some elements of the Islamic State that are still circulating in the Turkish sphere after a long period where they were almost the bosses in the regional parts between Turkey and Syria. I think that Erdogan will need to take both security measures in coordination with the international community, but also political measures. And this is the big question. After years that he built his agenda on fighting the Syrian regime and the Iranians, is he going to do the shift? And will the letter of apology to the Russian is indicating the beginning of this shift?
Of their transition. And also interesting to know, we mentioned earlier in the studio that the government was very quick to point fingers at Islamic State. They didn't even take the PKK into consideration, which we know is another front within Turkey. And many times they would like to give reason to believe that perhaps the Kurds are behind this. Do you think this is also some internal shift that we can be seeing? Because also mentioned was that it polarizes society rather than brings people together when these attacks are taking. Is he changing? Is Erdogan changing his strategy in this respect?
I think so. Whether he is changing the strategy, we need to wait. But yes, there is some shift. There is some change in the Turkish attitude. As our foreigner said, in the Erdogan won the last elections because he polarized the Turkish population between the Turks and between the Kurds. One could expect that the Kurdish opposition would be an option for this attack, but very quickly the Turkish authorities pointed at the Islamic State, and this is also a way to distance the Turks from the Turkish regime, from the Islamic State, after a long period that Russians, Syrian, Iranians, and others were accusing the Turkish government of hosting the Islamic State, of supporting, giving it logistic and financial, buying its oil, etc., etc. So this is, in my opinion, the beginning of the change. The fact that the former Prime Minister, who was the kind of the godfather of this kind of coordination between Turkey and the Islamic State, was gone.
Left his position, and this could maybe open a new era. Now, this is all taking place amid relations and reconciliation between Israel and Turkey. The Israeli cabinet approved this morning the agreement, which will be coming into effect shortly, Oz.
Yeah, well, it convened this morning. It took hours and hours for this meeting, and just a little while ago they had actually approved that. Again, not without a fight. From what we understand, there were arguments, harsh arguments made or pointed out within the meeting. We do know that out of 12 members of the cabinet of the Israel's security cabinet, it is basically 1/4 voted against this reconciliation agreement, but that's not enough. Which also reflects
a shift in Israeli society. And yet, what kind of reactions and condolences are we seeing from Israeli officials since the attack?
We do see some, and it is amid this reconciliation agreement, because if you compare it to other terror attacks that were in Turkey, almost none, not even a voice not even a peep from Israeli ministers. Certainly not ministers, but also not MKs, not MPs. We did hear from three of the heads of some of the major parties in Israel. We're talking about Mr. Herzog, who yesterday already had a statement out condolences for the Turkish people, and Mr. Lapid and the head of the Knesset, of the Parliament, Mr. Yuli Edelstein, who speaks really for the coalition in this case, and sent a letter. But I do want to go back for a minute to the cabinet meeting, because we talked about 1/4 has voted against, and one of the people who voted against that is a recent addition to this government, and that is Mr. Lieberman, who was appointed very recently to defense minister, and this is Lieberman going this term going head to head against Netanyahu. We saw that in the past. In the past, it caused for their divorce. We don't know where
something that we wouldn't expect this time round, and perhaps wouldn't expect so soon. And also something very interesting, there was a recent poll by Channel 10 showing that a lot of the Israeli public, it was over 50% that opposed the poll. We'll be talking about this in a little while. And meanwhile, the international leaders who we spoke about were quick to offer condolences, as were Israelis, to the Turkish people, and condemn yesterday's bloody attack. This next report by Denise Wood takes a look.
Prominent politicians and world leaders around the globe are expressing sorrow and condemning the terror attacks at Istanbul's Ataturk airport, which killed at least 36 and injured close to 150 people.
Let me express my deepest condolences to the families and loved ones of the victims of tonight's attacks in Ataturk International Airport in Istanbul. In times like these, we should all be united.
Heute noch nicht, wer und mit welchem Motiv heute Abend diese
Tonight, we do not know who carried out these horrid attacks and with what motivation. I will not further speculate on that, but I offer my deepest sympathies to the relatives of the victims and the injured. And I want to say to all of the Turkish people that we consider ourselves united with them in the fight against terror.
Uns im Kampf gegen den Terrorismus vereint sehen.
So this is a very sad day for the people of Turkey. It's a very sad day for the people who love freedom, as we do and the Turkish people do. But again, I convey our deepest sympathies and condolences to the people of Turkey, the families of those who've been killed and injured, and wish those that have been injured a speedy recovery.
Our deepest condolences go out to the families of those killed in this bombing and shooting attack, and we wish a speedy recovery to those injured. We'd also like to express our strong solidarity with the Turkish government and the Turkish people.
Along with denouncing the incident, several world leaders also expressed a pressing need to identify who carried out the attack, to keep additional terrorist attacks from occurring.
Condamner fermement cette attaque.
I also want to strongly condemn the attack and make sure we can know exactly who were the perpetrators, so that together we can do anything possible to fight against terrorism, especially in this region.
Possible d'engager contre le terrorisme, notamment.
They're still collecting information and trying to ascertain what happened and who did it. And I won't comment further on it except to say that this is daily fare. And that's why I say the first challenge we need to face is countering non-state violent actors.
No group has yet claimed responsibility for the attacks, which saw 3 suicide bombers open fire and blow themselves up at the entrance to Istanbul's main international airport. The Turkish Prime Minister Binali Yildirim says findings indicate that the attack was carried out by the Islamic State, but a probe is still underway.
Israel and Turkey announced on Monday they would normalize relations after 6 years of broken ties, a rare rapprochement in a divided Middle East, driven, some would say, by the prospect of lucrative Mediterranean gas deals, as well as mutual fears over growing security risks. And now joining me in studio is Erez Tzadok from the Aviv Fund, and we're still with Oz Rosenberg, our diplomatic correspondent. Erez, you're one of the leaders or leading voices against the gas deal by Netanyahu.
Yes, leading voices, yes. Yes, and I think that, this agreement in Turkey, I just heard Dan Meridor, which was the minister that was responsible when the Marmara issue happened. And he said that this agreement it was ready for, the last 5 years. And actually, it was in better terms than now. And the question is, why now? Nothing happened. And, we give it all. We pay terrorists $21 million. And we apologize. So, we are the blames, right? If we apologize and we pay money. And we don't think so. And we get nothing. The Hamas is still in Turkey. Everything, from their concerns stays the same. And we believe that there is a gas issue here. And, Leviathan field, we cannot develop Leviathan field without Turkey. That's the fact right now, because, we cannot export to Europe other than using Turkey as the gate to Europe. We cannot export to Asia because the factories in Egypt are being busy with the Egyptian gas.
Still very critical of the deal, and those critical of the Turkey-Israel reconciliation deal are saying that it was driven by financial considerations. Oz, would you like to react?
I'll just say that in his recent visit to Moscow, Mr. Netanyahu met with Mr. Putin at the presser there. One of the main points that they stressed was the fact that Israel and Russia is rooting for expanding their relationships, namely within the field of energy. And then this goes into the bigger frame of a free trade-free economic zone. So And we do know that today Mr. Putin and Mr. Erdogan talked together, and Mr. Putin said, explicitly said, by the way, in that visit, that they don't have any problem with Israel and Turkey getting together. As long as we have a good relationship between two countries, it's good for the whole region.
This deal is taking place in a very divided Middle East. So isn't a peace and a strong alliance within this chaotic region more important than opposing the gas deal?
The question is how long it will stick, you know. And, you know, when you talk about the gas and the gas deal with Turkey, it's very important to understand that this agreement has nothing to do with the gas, with the details of the gas agreement, okay? The gas agreement will be negotiated later. Now, once Erdogan knows that we need Turkey to export the gas to Europe, and without Turkey, we cannot develop the Leviathan field, what would be the negotiation all about? I mean, he holds all the cards. So,
and also important to note, Israel's High Court did reject Netanyahu's gas plan, and it seems that it's maybe able to take place or take a different shape through this reconciliation with Turkey.
It won't happen. I believe that Leviathan won't be developed in the next coming years. I believe that we cannot even export to Turkey. It's too much complicated, but I think that they need to keep the story that we can develop Leviathan. From other reasons, they want to export from a Tamar field, which is very small, so they need to keep the story that Leviathan will be developed. I don't think it will happen. I don't think it will happen through Turkey. I think that the negotiation will be too tough, and I don't think that peace agreement that start with the, you know, that start this way will continue and will stay for a long time. I don't believe so, and I believe that we're paying a very high price, not in terms of dollars, you know, but we're paying very high price because we give up on things that we believe in, and nothing will come out of it.
So you think that it's for financial reasons only. Others will say that there are important security measures that were taken into consideration with this deal. Now, tourism in Turkey has, of course, been struggling recently, and the latest attack, yesterday's attack at the airport, will not help the embattled industry. Let's take a look in this next report.
At least 36 people killed and 150 injured in coordinated suicide bombings and shooting attacks at the bustling Ataturk airport. But beyond the tragic human element, the attacks will be yet another serious blow to the Turkish economy. Tourists, after all, rarely visit the battlegrounds of the Islamic State.
According to assessments, so far 36 people have lost their lives along with 3 suicide bombers. We also have people who are wounded. Many of them suffer from minor injuries, but few people suffer from serious injuries. Treatment is underway.
Turkey relies heavily on tourism, and the sector accounts for 14% of the country's GDP. More than 1 million registered workers are employed in the industry. But the sector has been suffering. A delicate balance between Ankara and the Kurds was upset last year, leading to violent attacks. And ISIS has lashed out at Turkey throughout the country's porous borders with Syria. Political feuds have also dragged down Turkey's tourism sector. The country's relations with Israel have been mired since the 2010 Mavi Marmara flotilla raid, leading to a drop-off in Israeli visitors to their once favored vacation spot. And Russians have also stopped visiting after Turkey shot down a Russian military jet it claimed flew within its airspace last year. Russia responded by banning charter flights to Turkey and the sale of tourism packages, including Turkish destinations. The latest attack on Turkey's transportation hub will be just one more reason for tourists to stay away.
Well, I think I won't travel anymore.
So I can't even fly anymore. I'm like so scared. So everybody in the flight the same way.
Turkey has made efforts to bolster its struggling tourism industry. In February, then Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoglu unveiled a plan to inject $87 million to the sector. But early figures from 2016 show that the beleaguered industry is trending down. And the government's financial support will not be enough to compensate for the sense of security tourists are increasingly losing when considering a visit to Turkey.
And we're going to go back to Istanbul, where our correspondent Mohammed Al-Qasim is standing by. Mohammed, you have an update for us.
Yes, according to the Turkish government, they have revised their number of casualties. Now it stands at 41, and also they have revised the number of foreigners that have been killed in the attack, and they say it's up to 10. That's according to the Prime Minister's office and to the police authorities here in Istanbul.
Wonderful. And if you can tell us just a little bit more about what's happening on the streets, walking around, the general atmosphere, and is there still a sense of panic?
Well, let me tell you one thing. There is a sense of anger more than a sense of panic. We've been driving around the city of Istanbul, and people are going about their work, but they are very angry, and you wouldn't believe who they're angry at. They are angry at the government and at the president, saying that this is the result of the policies of President Recep Tayyip Erdogan.
Mohammed Al-Qasim, thank you very much for your insight. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have here with the extensive coverage over the aftermath of yesterday's attack in Turkey, with the death toll rising to 41. We'll continue to cover this story, of course, throughout the day here at I-24 News. Thank you for watching.